welcome you all and thank you for joining us for our very first history talk of the season. These history talks are near and dear to me. They are our ability to help share our history, our heritage, and of course our stories here with you guys in the community for free. It's something that I'm really proud that we have to offer, and I'm going to go ahead and turn over the introduction of this program to our friend Kelly. Usually I would write up a little thing to introduce all of our speakers. I started doing it yesterday and I said, Cassandra, wait. I think these people know how to speak for a living. I think I'm just going to let them introduce themselves. So Kelly, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, I guess we could just start by introducing ourselves. Brack, you tell who you are, and I'll go from there.
Okay. My name is Brack Llewellyn. I live just outside town here in Mount Airy. I'm part-time on the announced staff at WSYD and very part-time at WPAQ. We just fill in as needed wherever this gentleman says the need is. That's kind of where I go.
And Brack's also, for our sister station, music and program director for WSYD, and he's a man of many talents. I'm Kelly Epperson. I am co-owner with my wife Jennifer Epperson of WPAQ, and I still manage somehow and cover for these fellas when they're not able to be there. And once in a while I get an air shift. That's my first love, being able to be on the air talking to you. I have been anything from collecting bills to breaking news stories. So we do it all on a local level like this. That's a great place to start if you're looking for a job in radio, to start on this level. But I could go on and on, so I need to stop for this moment and turn it over to this gentleman right here to my right.
Hello, Mark Brown, News and Sports Director at WPAQ, and I think I am your longest tenured employee, over 40 years.
I think so.
Yeah, I started before I could drive, so 14, 15 years old, and here we are now. And I've done a lot of different positions at the radio station too, and at WSYD as well. So happy to have been a part of, gosh, we've been on the air 75 years, so that's roughly over half of it I've had a part of it. Glad to be in on that.
Yeah, Mark
Kind of an honor, really.
Mark is a man of many talents as well. And come on in, Jenny.
Yeah,
Come on.
save your seat.
It's your turn. It's your turn to introduce yourself. We're doing introductions right now to start.
Come on, I got you a secret blanket.
Mark is also involved some in production, not as much as I'd like for him to be.
Me either.
But he's turned out some great commercials, really unique. And come on up here.
No, up here, you have to sit
This
up
is
here
your
with
seat.
It's a round table. You got to sit at the table.
I didn't know this.
It's very informal. We're just here to share some
It's
stories.
a good thing I brought coffee. I had to have some to get back on again.
I
Go
think,
be a test.
I think I am the only radio person in the world that does not drink coffee. I think that's true.
Wow.
Kelly drinks enough for the rest of us put together.
That's true.
That is true.
8 cups a day in the morning.
That's the secret, isn't it?
That's maybe part of it.
Well, see, you'll never die that way. That's the thing.
And Jenny, we are running through some quick introductions if you want to hop in and get started.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm Jenny Lowry, just off the air. So I was running down here from the merry-go-round. And I've been at the station, I don't remember how many years, several years. And I'm the host of the Saturday morning merry-go-round. I also have an afternoon show about one day a week, and whenever I can, and I love to listen. So I appreciate being asked to be with y'all today.
All right. And I guess I'll just make a brief opening statement. And come on in. Glad to have you.
Is this the place?
This is the place, George.
Yeah. George Spade. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we signed on the air in 1948, Groundhog Day. And my father and his father basically built the place. They had some help, but my grandfather had a sawmill, and they got lumber and they sawed it up, made the doors, the soundproof doors in the station. And they did a lot of the bricklaying and grooved paneling. So it was really made by my family's hands, the building. They had a tower, a group from St. Petersburg, or Petersburg, Virginia. I guess it's Petersburg, Virginia that came in. And anyway, signed on in 1948. The pledge was from my dad that we would set aside time each and every day and week to help promote and preserve music that's native to the area, the bluegrass and the Blue Ridge Mountain style string music, and to certainly promote those who made the music, the local musician. And the WPAQ merry-go-round has been on the longest of any program, and that does just that. But during the week, we'll have a lot of live performers that come in and we'll put them on the air. Break in usually from what we're doing and let them perform and talk and interview them and all that sort of thing. But we've done a lot of local things, broadcast the state championship, Mount Airy Bears, 1948. They won the state over Laurinburg. Johnny Joyce was the sports director back then, news director, and did it on a wire. And these were later transferred to a lacquered disc. There's about 17 records that we were able to transfer. Ivy Shepard made it possible that we transferred those discs, and we played back the 1948 state championship. And George, you were on that team, weren't you? 1948?
What?
1948 Mount Airy Bears? Weren't you on that team?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Now, when you say did it on a wire, for those of y'all that don't know, before there was tape and before there was actually transcriptions, before they actually started doing, one of the portable ways that you could record was have a reel of wire wrapped up, and it ran through a machine sort of like a tape recorder, sort of like a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and you'd wind up with several thousand feet of just wire. And then later on, somebody figured out you could flatten out the wire, and then figured out you could make it out of plastic and coat it with rust, and that's where we got audio tape from. But that original thing was recorded on a length of wire like a clothesline, and the quality of the thing is unbelievable. It sounds like it's happening right now.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're carrying it live every time you air it.
Yeah, you can hear the marching band at halftime, the cheerleaders, the crowd.
You hear the crowd talking
Crowd
back
noise,
behind them.
the
That's
whistles,
amazing
referee whistles.
clarity for the time.
Yeah.
And that's Ralph. That was all Ralph's engineering right there.
But Daddy wanted to have a station that was close to the community. He wanted to give the farm news. That was very important to him, especially at lunchtime when the farmers had a break. They could listen in the noon hour and for the farm report and tobacco report, local news. So it's just a truly local hometown station.
Sounds great. So that will conclude our opening remarks. So just to say thank you again for everyone who's coming in and joining us. Just a reminder, my name's Cassandra. I'm going to be moderating here just a little bit today. So we are here to celebrate 75 years of WPAQ. And before we open up our roundtable discussion, we got a quick video we'd like to share from Ralph's brother Stu, Kelly, your uncle.
Congratulations to WPAQ on celebrating its 75th birthday. And thank you, Kelly, for carrying on the great tradition of Ralph Efferson, your father, and WPAQ. Radio began in our family in 1938-39 when Ralph traded a banjo he had gotten for Christmas for a radio that was powered by a windmill on top of our house. The windmill recharged the battery because we had no electricity. Suddenly, when we got the radio going, people came to our house on Saturday nights from around the mountains in Ararat, Virginia to hear the Grand Ole Opry. He also listened to John Brown Sr. from Siloam Springs, Arkansas at John Brown University. He said, if you can find a way to get out here, we'll give you a job and you can get an education and you don't need any money. Ralph said, that's where I want to go. And my mother, Harry and Lula Epperson, parents, said, that's where you'll go. So, September 1st, he took off. September 1st, 1939, for John Brown. My Aunt Dora and my mother had sewed several shirts from flour sacks. We got him several pairs of bib overalls and a couple of pair of shoes that had been half soled a couple of times by my father. And so Uncle Boyd Matthews, who had the only car in the family, drove him over to the corner of 601 and Main Street in Mount Airy. And we went across the street in the car, sat across the street in the car, and watched until he caught a ride. About 3 weeks later, Ralph sent a postcard. They said he arrived in John Brown University in Salem Springs, Arkansas. They gave him a job in the dairy, but he told them that he was trying to leave the farm. He wanted to be in broadcasting. So they agreed to let him at KUOA work at the radio station on campus at John Brown. He graduated with honors at the top of his class. And then during World War II, he went to Washington, D.C. and worked in the Naval Laboratories there. He was not eligible to join the Army because of a serious spinal injury suffered when he was a child. About 1943, he returned to Arat, Virginia, with a big box and a big wooden box. By the way, the box is still in the attic at the farmhouse in Arat, Virginia. So he unpacked the contents, and first of all, he proceeded to wire our house for electricity, which was a truly magic moment in all of our lives. And then he proceeded to build an experimental radio station at 740 on the dial, and he called it WAVA, and he put in one of the upstairs bedrooms. And he established a studio down in the front parlor, where we had a piano. And so immediately our house became the center of the whole community. I could not believe it, and I loved every minute of it. On Friday nights, all day Saturday, Sunday afternoons, everybody almost would come in their cars. The cars would be lined up about a half a mile on each side of our house on the dirt road there at the farmhouse on what is now Unity Church Road. And the people would come in, they brought their fiddles, their banjos. Some could sing pretty well, some couldn't sing hardly at all, but he put them all on the air. And then lots of preachers showed up with, as I remember, big black Bibles. And they would preach, and I remember many of them preached so loud that I remember thinking they really didn't need to be on the radio. You could hear them a mile away anyway. But they preached and they sang, and we were the center of the community, and it was just a wonderful time in our life. And then Ralph proceeded to file for a radio station, CP in Mount Airy, 740 on the dial, WPAQ. My father had a sawmill in addition to running a small tobacco farm, and so he was training Wilbur Smith how to run a sawmill. And so he worked with Wilbur, and in exchange for my dad's training, Wilbur sawed out the lumber from our farm, and that was the lumber used to build WPAQ. The building is still standing, and the soundproof doors leading into the studios are about a foot thick. And as they said, on opening day, on Groundhog Day in 1948, a train could go down the hall and you would be in the studio and you couldn't hear it. And that's true today, I'm sure also. So from the very beginning, my mother and father and Ralph and everybody early all agreed that WPAQ would never advertise alcoholic beverages, and we'd be wholesome and have a lot of people preaching on the radio and a lot of good gospel music, and also lots of good traditional country music. And that's what the station is still doing today. So from Ralph gave me a job. First of all, he gave me a little job at Arat when he first opened up, and I was, that would be 43, I would be 7 years old. And then when he opened WPAQ, I was 12 years old. He gave me a job to do work that he really didn't need to have done, but he wanted to help me get involved with radio, and I'll always appreciate about him. I loved him, he loved me, he put me on the radio at our house reading the 23rd Psalm in 1943. I was 7 years old, and I still have a recording of that today, which is one of my most cherished treasures. And then Ralph went on, of course, to keep WPAQ going, and now Kelly has taken over, and the tradition of WPAQ and Ralph Epperson goes on. He's a hero to me. He's a brother I dearly love. I called on his advice at least weekly until he went home to be with the Lord. Just wonderful people. And I'm a co-founder of Salem Media Group. With my brother-in-law, Edward Atzinger, we have over 115 radio stations scattered all over the country. And these radio stations and this company, which is a public company, originated because of the help and the vision of Ralph Epperson, a great man. And I can't think of anything I'd rather do than to see him again. And I expect to. When I get to heaven, I expect to see Ralph. And hopefully we'll have a talk and reminisce a lot about the great things this man did. So, congratulations, WPAQ. Lord, thank you for Ralph Epperson. And Kelly, thank you and all the staff for carrying on tradition of WPAQ.
Start with the beginning. Would any of you like to share with us anything about the early days, early stories that just really stood out to you?
The Ralph, we were hoping to have a few other people from way back when here, and sickness has prevented a couple of them from being here. I started in 1982 or 3, I think it was, 82. And that's not really an early day, but anymore I guess it is, geez. And I was looking for a summer job, and my mother went to church with Ralph and his family, and she said, the man in town that has the radio station, we had just moved here a couple of years earlier, he's going to give you a job, isn't that great? And I said, doing what? She said, I don't know, but he's going to give you a job, and that's not like digging ditches. And I thought, well, okay. And the good thing was I could ride my bike to the radio station. It wasn't very far away. So when I met Ralph, Ralph's son-in-law at the time actually was interviewing me for a job, but Ralph had decided that I could have a job. Well, he never really told me when to start. So after about 3 weeks of not hearing from Ralph, I had to call him at home and ask him when I was supposed to start. He said, oh, you should have been there last week. And I thought, well, somebody should have told me. And Ralph was very quickly revealed to be that kind of guy. He was a very organized, very thoughtful, very, very caring person. But if it was an engineering thing, he was all wrapped up in it. He might not remember to tell you that you'd actually been hired or something. So I went in, and I was fascinated by this guy. He was like a cross between a scientist and a cartoon character, and I'd never seen anybody like him. And the more I hung out with him, the more I realized he was a genius. He wanted everything done his way. When I started there, where they start you is on Sundown Serenade in the evenings. Is that still pretty much what you do? If somebody comes in and they're new to radio, that's where they started you. And luckily enough, I knew enough about 40s and 50s music to where I could DJ that pretty easily. And every night you'd have to sign the station off, which involved a long list on the wall of things you needed to do to shut the station down. You can't just flip a switch, you can today, but back then you couldn't just flip a switch and have the station go off for the night. There were several things, about a 45-minute checklist you had to do. And being 15 years old, I was not going to hang around after we went off the air more than about 5 minutes. And so I got down to where I could run through that checklist and even start before we actually signed off. I could actually start doing things before the station actually went off the air for the night, you know, and got down to where I could do it pretty fast. And apparently I left the door open one night and that sort of thing, so he backed me down on that. But it was that way. You had to do it in a certain order. Part of it was for the electronics, and part of it was just because that's how Ralph did it. And if you didn't do it that way, he was likely to call you at home and go through that over the phone with you. And some of those conversations, I kid you not, went well over an hour. And I just seen him 15 minutes ago, but he's on the phone now, and that's just part of working there, right? I don't know if you got him that long. I don't know if anybody else got him that long. I got him that long. There were times when he left messages on my answering machine, back when we had answering machines. And I would just pull a stool up and sit down, and the message would go on until the machine cut him off, and then there'd be another message that went for 30 more minutes. And a lot of it was stuff I knew, but he just wanted to be sure by repetition that it was something that sunk in. So I owe him that, the patience, if nothing else. I think he taught me patience more than anything. But brilliant man. And like Stu has said before, Ralph's the kind of engineer, most of us are, that if you ask him what time it is, he would tell you how the watch was built. You know, and probably not ever answer the original question either, right?
Right.
15 minutes ago, I asked you what time it was, you know, that kind of thing. But when I started there, I'd never worked at a place like that before. It was amazing. And the reach that it had. You think, well, it's a little country radio station and it covers Surrey County. 10,000 watts during the day covers an awful lot of territory. 30 counties, something like that? 24 to 30 counties?
Sounds right.
Maybe a little bit more. My dad, when I was growing up in Florida, my dad used to catch it just right early in the morning on his way to work in DeSoto, Florida, and listen to the obituaries and could tell who had died in his hometown, Mount Airy, North Carolina. That's a pretty far spread. And we regularly still, on terrestrial broadcasting, we're getting people from Ireland that accidentally caught a wave and listened to us, right? And that used to thrill Ralph to death. They'd send in a letter, and he'd come in and show it to us. Got a letter from Australia. Somebody sent us a letter from Australia. And he did not live to see us streaming on the internet, but I bet that would have just thrilled him absolutely no end. We have regular listeners overseas, and now you tell where they are, right?
Yes. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, there's a way to do it.
Yeah, and that would have thrilled him no end. I mean, I think it would have blown his mind. But he'd have been happy about it. WPAQ has been the best ambassador to the rest of the world I think we ever could have had here. And I'm biased, but I mean, even if I didn't work there, I believe I would still say that. Somebody else talk. I'm not supposed to talk a whole lot.
You were there long before I was.
Please, Bragg. I love to hear Bragg talk about things.
Well, like Mark, I began there in the early 1980s. I think I interviewed with the same guy Mark did. I had done some brief work at the station in Dobson when it first signed on, and enjoyed it. And I was looking for a part-time job, so I went over and what the first sense I got of WPAQ was the history of it. WPAQ is one of the few radio stations that's still in a building that's intended to be a radio station.
Yeah.
Most modern radio stations are in office buildings.
Yep.
Or somewhere else. And the history of it just surrounds you. I wasn't aware of it until a long time later, talking to Ralph or having conversations with Lucy, Ralph's sister, who was the traffic manager for many years. But you learned those were hallowed halls, and for all its notoriety, as Mark was saying, being so revered, Ralph was never the kind to beat his chest. He was proud of his radio station. He was proud of his family, but he wasn't a proud man. He let the work speak for itself. Humility was one of his bywords. And you learned, if you messed up on the air, Ralph was almost always listening.
Always.
And you get a call, but I don't ever recall getting an angry phone call from him because he didn't do that.
I don't recall seeing him angry. And I may have tried when I was a teenager. I don't think I ever saw him angry.
Well, I'm sure he was capable of it, but he never expressed it to the people that worked for him.
Mm-hmm.
If you messed up, he would correct you gently and make sure you were okay. And by the same token, which is something not a lot of bosses will do, if you did something well, he'd call you and tell you you did something well. And that's kind of rare. You know the old saying, when you're right, they never remember. When you're wrong, they never forget. But Ralph worked both sides of that. He would correct you when you needed correcting. If you stumbled over a name consistently and that sort of thing. But at the same time, and early on, and I don't know the exact words Ralph put this into me. But he said, now listen, when you turn on the microphone, make sure you got something to say. And don't just turn it on to be talking. And he's right. I've forgotten that rule many times. I forget it every day. But, and he said, you know, pretend you're speaking to one person. You know, you got a big audience out there, but pretend you're speaking to one person. And that's always helped too. It's a unique place to be, even now, 75 years on. The history continues to grow. It's stronger than ever. But when you walk the halls and you stand in Studio A and you think, I'm standing in a place where, you know, Charlie Monroe played, where all the luminaries of old time music and gospel and bluegrass have played over the years, and you think about the live shows that came through, and we have untold hours of recorded music, thanks to Ralph and to Kelly, who took the time to record it. Otherwise, they would have been lost from the Mount Airy Fiddlers Convention, from the Galax Fiddlers Convention, from the Autumn Leaves Festival, and the list goes on and on and on. Merry-go-round performances that are unique and wonderful. So the history of it is all around you. And you just, and it's always, I know Ralph spent a lot of time figuring out where to put the radio station. He put a lot of thought into where it was going to go. But there is no more peaceful spot that I know of personally than where WPAQ is set. Especially on a summer evening, you leave at sunset after the sundown serenade, even though we don't sign off anymore. You step out on that front steps, and you can hear your heartbeat. That's how quiet it is. And then maybe there's a little wind in the trees. You can see why he chose that spot. And from that peaceful little spot on the hill up there, he's reaching out. You know, we're reaching out to thousands and thousands of people. It's a humbling experience. It really kind of is. I am not nearly as conversant in the music as anybody else at this table, and others who work at Bob King and others who work at WPAQ. I have a great deal of respect for it and the people who play it. And there's some real characters, as my grandfather would say, that made and make the music. But I don't think there's ever been. Radio stations are known for changing formats like the rest of us change our songs. They will go with whatever's popular, whatever can get them the most revenue. That's their bottom line. That was never the bottom line for Mr. Epperson. He had a mission and he stayed with it. And you don't see that much anymore. And you have to respect that, because thick or thin, stormy weather or fair, Ralph stayed the course. And he did it with kindness, he did it with humility. And you know, it's a testament to him that 75 years on, this station's probably more popular than it's ever been. That's all I know.
Wow, that's great.
I like what you said about he didn't correct you the way a normal person would. I still use this. One of Ralph's favorite things to say to me, to correct me, was, yeah, well, that's a noble effort. Now, would you not love to be corrected that way? That takes the sting out of whatever he was getting ready to follow it with. Yeah, hey, that's a noble effort. I mean, I still use that myself. I've used it on my kids. It's just a wonderful way to be. Nothing but a gentleman about even the way he corrected you if you weren't doing something exactly the way he wanted it done. I love that.
One of the stories that go along with that, back in the early 70s, there was a fella who was a junior or senior in high school, at Mount Airy High School, Bradley Peavy. His parents were Al and Margaret Peavy. And Bradley did a little show in the afternoon, kind of more of maybe a rock and roll show for just a few hours, because we were trying to get the young people to listen. And he was real popular. Well, my dad called him up one afternoon after he had been there a while, and he said, "Hey Bradley, I'd like for you to stop by my house on your way home this evening, if you would. 312 Robin Road." He said, "Okay, I can do that." So Bradley told us later that he was thinking, wow, maybe I'm gonna get a raise, I'm gonna get a promotion. And he drove over to my dad's house, and it was just my dad there at the house. He rang the doorbell, my dad came to the door, welcomed Bradley in, said, come on in, have a seat in my living room. So they sat there, and there was this great big dictionary sitting there on the table. And there was a marker inside the dictionary. My dad opened that book up to a certain word, and this day I cannot think of the word. Al Peavy couldn't remember the word. But he said, that word right there, would you pronounce that for me? So Bradley did, and he'd say, well, it's a little bit more like this. So they went over how to pronounce the word correctly.
Just sitting there in Ralph's living room with the clock ticking, right?
That's right. So that was the thing that he wanted from Bradley Peavy, was to correct him in a nice way how to say this word. A couple of early stories, and I'll move on to something else. Back in the early days of the station, the sheriff called my dad one evening and had a local news story. Sheriff Patterson called up my dad and said, Ralph, I got a local news story for you. We raided a steal, a big operation, a big mash, and we broke it all up. And well, that's great, Sheriff, my dad would say. What about those who had the steal? What about them? Do you have to tell that? Well, we try to be as complete and thorough as we can, Sheriff. Well, you tell them that a tired man can't run as fast as a scared man. But then there was another incident that happened when my dad was trying to get the station on the air. There was a preacher who wanted time on the station. And they were around where the tower was, and there were tower erectors. There were some up on top of the tower, some on the ground, and they were shouting back and forth, the workers, a lot of profanity. My dad was right there around them, and the preacher who wanted time on the station was within earshot, heard all this going on. And he kept asking my dad, I need to get some time on your station. Well, my dad didn't give him much attention. Finally, he just said, well, I just tell you what, Ralph, if you ever do get this place going, it's going to take about a 6 months revival to get things right around here.
Get the air cleared.
Get that air clear.
Now, tell the story, because they were interested in it here at the museum, and the one photograph at the museum, what we look for is photographs from history past. The one that has always gotten away from me is, Ralph told this story about the day they completed the tower, and you had steeplejacks from Virginia doing it, I think.
That's right.
The guy used to work for the circus and did a handstand on top of the tower the day it was completed. And I always said, oh my gosh, did somebody get a picture of that? And at one point, Ralph said, yeah, there's one around here somewhere. How many years ago? If you ever run across that, we'd love to have that. But what a great story. They were so relieved that they did it. The guy stood on top of the tower on his hands. What, 220?
305 feet.
305 feet.
Well, I remember, I'm not trying to butt in on you, Mark, but I remember during the pandemic, the last time I was up there, when the man came to change the top beacon, and watching him climb that thing, I was just about to have a heart attack myself, seeing that guy go all the way to the top. We could see him of course you could see him from we walked outside to watch him. And when he came back in, he was completely wet with sweat. I have never seen anything, and he was a young guy, younger than me, but I thought to myself, how in the world do they ever get anybody to do that job? But that
He would do it for $100.
Oh,
Each
gosh.
time. $100 to go up and change the bulb.
Yeah, and the bulbs are good sized, and the red light covers are about that big. I mean,
The one on top for the beacon light is 5 feet
Yeah.
length.
I remember looking it up somewhere. I think the tower is the same height as the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. I'm pretty sure they're the same size. That I had looked that up when we were at Cape Hatteras and figured it out. Pretty neat. You got your beacon up here and you got your beacon down there.
Yep.
He took me one time, Ralph did, when he was showing me around the station, when he learned that I was interested in electronics and engineering and all that. And he said, come here, I want to show you something one day. We walked down to the base of the tower, 300-400 feet away from the station. And he goes around and he opens the fence at the base of the tower, because it's high voltage, you got to keep people out. And he opens this little door on the side of the tower. And he says, by the way, that's a handle from a Model T right there that we're using to get in. Never throw anything away. And then he took a pencil out of his pocket and he held the pencil on the secondary, right over the secondary coil, right before the signal goes up the tower. It gets multiplied a little bit so it can go out and broadcast. And he held this pencil right there and an arc started, and he backed the pencil off till he had a little electrical arc about that long. But the signal that the station was putting out was in the arc. You could actually hear what the station is broadcasting if you do that trick. And he said, I call this the singing fire. And I was amazed by that, because he wasn't getting shocked. He was pulling an arc about that long. You got to know how to do it. I wouldn't dare go down there and try it. But I mean, that was the most amazing thing I could ever remember. And I thought, I want to go into this field. I want to learn how to do this. That was the coolest, but I just always loved the fact that he, as an aside, said, yeah, that's the door handle off a Model T, by the way. Never throw anything away.
No, you didn't.
And Kelly, one story we get asked about a lot here is about the potential of a pirate radio station back in the day. Is this a story you know about?
Oh, the one that Stu talked about, the station in the house, the home place?
Yep.
Yeah, he put a little radio station together. It wasn't supposed to. He said, I wouldn't tell this much if I were you. But I think it's okay now.
We're probably outside their statute of limitations at this point.
But yeah, he made a little radio station in the house there in Ararat, Virginia. And you could actually pick it up as far away as White Plains. I've had people tell me that they could hear it that far away. And they would come and perform in the parlor down on the first floor of the house. His equipment was up on the second floor in a bedroom. But preachers would come. Olin Nunn, the Nunn brothers' father, would come, and Shorty Jenkins, I think it was, would come and preach. And they would gather out in the yard and in the house and be on that little radio that my dad put together, a radio station. Like I said, wasn't supposed to, but he loved it so much, he couldn't help but do it.
And that became a big deal because there were places around here that didn't even have telephones in 1948. And you might get the newspaper and you might not. That was the only way you could hear any kind of news, was over Ralph's wireless, basically.
Yeah, one time my dad, he wired up the phones in the house before the phone company got there. And the phone company showed up to hook them in, the phone in. And he saw them coming in, he ran and hid because he thought he'd be in trouble. But he was a pretty smart fellow, I'll have to say.
So is it true, because some of the folklore is your grandma got tired of there being a frolic in the house every other night?
Well, she said you can't have this country live, the country type music, the fiddle music on Sunday. We just want to have gospel music and preaching on Sunday. And so they asked one of the performers if you knew a gospel number to play. And I think he said, well, I think I can do the Great Speckled Bird. So they did that. And one time Olin Nunn did Johnson's Old Gray Mule on Sunday. And my grandmother said, now boy, I told you I didn't want this kind of music carrying on Sunday. Just want preaching and gospel music. I don't like that, what I just heard. And he said, well, that's Johnson's Old Gray Mule, but it doesn't need to be on Sunday, she said. And he said, well, it says in the Bible to make a joyful noise unto the Lord. And I think that song with Johnson's Old Gray Mule is a joyful noise.
When I started up there, Ralph, we were playing mostly LP records. And if Ralph's way of censoring a song was to cut a paper label and stick it over the grooves in that particular song so you couldn't play it. So you'd pick up a record, there'd be 3 or 4 little pieces of tape on it, and you'd know, okay, I'm not gonna be able to play these songs. But as soon as everybody was gone, I'd lift those things and listen to them, play them in the studio. They never went out over the air, but he was pretty good about censoring stuff.
Yeah.
And one thing he was very conscious of, and I do want to address that, we had an event at the museum, the African American Read-In this week, and one of the ladies there told me specifically to thank Ralph and the station for giving that population a voice in Mount Airy too. That was not something that was easily done at the time. And some of the songs Ralph was censoring was because he was afraid there were words in there that might be offensive to people of color. He was very touchy about that, even when I was there, and had been so before. He was a friend to that community even way back when. Apparently went out of his way to do it. And that says a lot for where we are and how he did. He believed everybody got a fair shake.
Wasn't there an African American quartet that had a regular?
Oh, yeah.
program?
Yeah, the Silver Tone Harmonizers.
And that was in the very early days.
That was back in the early days,
Yeah.
late 40s.
That's very groundbreaking for the time.
Yeah, it was a African American quartet and Silver Tone Harmonizers. We're still trying to find more of their music. We've only got one recording that my dad made of them.
The Fodrells.
And the Fodrells, yeah, the Fodrells from up in Patrick County were regular features on the merry-go-round. And
Yes.
Autumn Leaves Festival, Mayfest, and Pilot Mountain.
Yeah, Ralph actually taught me what I know pretty much about the Piedmont blues. Because at first I thought, well, he's just into bluegrass and old time music. There's nothing I can really identify with him with. Because when I got in there in high school, I didn't like either one of those kinds of music. I was happier playing swing and big band music from 30s and 40s and maybe 50s. And one night he said, do you know anything about the blues? And I said, no, not really. And he said, listen to this. Well, he played the Fodrells for me. And he played, the Piedmont Blues, the Brownie McGee and all the stuff like that. Oh, it was fantastic. And he liked that music too. He wasn't just about local bluegrass and old time. He liked a lot of other, especially classical.
Yeah, he loved
he and I
classical.
bonded over classical too.
He had quite a library of classical music.
He did. And what a lot of people don't realize is, even people that had worked there, is that's Ralph's record collection we're playing. It's not like the station was buying stuff and people were bringing it in. And most of that personally belonged to Ralph that we were playing. So you had to be careful about how you handled those records. That's something too. I used to think I had a big collection of music, but there's nothing like that one up there. And there's rarities in that station. Not just the live recordings, but they will never re-release some of those LPs back there. You know they won't.
No, they'll never find their way on digital format.
Yeah, I'd like to see, just once, I'd like to see the whole collection laid out so we could tell exactly how big it was. I bet it would fill this room if you could get it all together. It's a lot of music.
Mark's talking about how Ralph's varied taste in music. And I don't know your dad's mind as well as you do, but Ralph didn't talk a lot. Most radio people never stop talking.
Amen.
That's why we're in business, I guess. He was a very contemplative man, and I've always heard you can't think if you're talking. And Ralph was a man of very deep thought, I believe. I believe he was. And in those quiet times, he would consider, the music he was listening to. He saw, I don't know this for a fact, maybe you can, Kelly, maybe you can clarify it. The Sundown Serenade is big band, swing, that sort of thing, the Great American Songbook. And yet it is very much, as much a part of this country's musical history as the bluegrass that WPAQ plays, especially the old time, which dates back centuries. We brought this over here with us from the British Isles and other places, but it's all part of the history of it. And and it's still being written. Every time somebody steps up to the mic in Studio A or down at the Earl, it's still being written. But I think Ralph was a man that thought deeply about everything. And I think that's one reason, WPAQ, its tradition is as rich as it is. He planned on being around for a while. He planned on WPAQ being around for a while. This wasn't a business he was going to build and sell in 10 years to someone else. He planned on being around, and as you can see, still is.
He, if you think about all the programming in a day on WPAQ, is something that my dad really enjoyed or thought was necessary to have on a radio station. It was called, and still called, block programming. You had a block of this and a block of that, but you had all the bluegrass and the old-time string music native to the area. Then keeping his word to my grandmother, who wanted my dad to be a minister. He said, well, I don't feel like I'm called to be a minister. How about if I have a radio station and I put ministers on the station and we give the gospel that way? And she said, well, I think that'll be okay. So you'll hear Christian programming 2 hours a day, more bluegrass and Blue Ridge Mountain style string music, big band, easy listening classical music in the evening, and a lot of news, a lot of information, weather. Daddy loved the evening news. He'd watch Chet Huntley and David Brinkley every night, 6:30. But he thought it was important to have news and to keep the public informed the best he could. And he wanted a station that was unique. He didn't want a station just like any other. He said if there were 25 stations up and down the dial doing pretty much the same thing, why would I want to be number 26? So he held that belief, and we're continuing that today.
Brack, I want to go back to something you said about the announcers. So we've heard that some of the announcers over the years have had some pretty big personalities. Is there any that stand out to you guys? Jimmy, I see
How
a
long do
laugh
you
on
have?
the face.
You need to say something at
I
this
see a big
point.
smile.
Oh, I thought you were.
She's
Go
so
ahead.
shy. Be on the air, she's so shy.
I've just talked and listened to music for 4 hours.
You'll be
Only
good to go.
I
four.
should be, yes.
Yeah, and it's the nature of the business that people come and go. Although at the same time, there have been announcers that were at the station for a long time. I wish Lou Bodie could be here today, because when I started at WPAQ, I learned so much from Lou. Lou was on the afternoons for years, Bodie in the afternoon, and Lou also mixed sound for the merry-go-round for years when it was at Studio A. So I learned a great deal about being on the air from Lou and what to do and what not to do, and a more patient and gentle man you'll ever meet. And Lou was very unassuming. He was not your typical radio guy. He's very kind of quiet and unassuming until he got on the air, and I loved his voice. But there have been people throughout the years. I know for a brief time in the 80s, we had a husband and wife team, and I can't think of the wife's name. She always seemed a little more anxious than she should have been. But this guy's name was actually DJ. He was. Remember him?
I do.
Yeah,
Had a beard.
He did. You could still hear his
He
voice.
smoked a lot.
He did, and yeah, he's about a 2-pack a day man, so with a nice baritone. But they were kind of unusual. But I learned from great people too. Ed McIntyre, who I wish could be here as well.
Oh, yeah, we tried.
I know Ed's health is not great right now. Ed was news director for a while. Ed came from television and radio, and he worked in Raleigh professionally. Ed has one of those voices every announcer wants. I mean, he really does. And Ed was amazing. I was working mornings for a while, and Ed did the 6 a.m. news, which we still do. And at about 3 minutes of 6, Ed would come crashing through the front door. I'm not making any of this up. Ed would come crashing through the front door. He would pass by the little teletype room, which is at the top of the hall near the lobby. rip the news off the teletype, come tearing down the hall, dragging it behind him, 5 or 6 feet of paper behind him, come into the studio, come behind the announcer, pop into what is now the production room, used to be the newsroom, pop in there, and with seconds to go, you know, I'd play the stinger to start the news. He'd throw on that mic, and you would not know that he hadn't been there for an hour preparing. He was that good. And in the middle of it, we'd have commercials, and Ed didn't know how many commercial breaks we had. So while he's still reading the news, he'd hold up one finger or two, and I would tell him how many commercials we had, 1 or 2, and he never looked up. Ed taught me how to read ahead of myself. It's a great trick if you're reading cold copy, especially. You learn while you're speaking to read 5 or 6 words ahead of yourself, so you're less likely to mess up. It gets tougher the older you are. But yeah, I learned a lot from Ed, and Ed was also, I learned this from WSYD. I don't know if you listen to WSYD at all, but we have a call-in show on Wednesdays, a request show that originated at that station in the 1950s. Ed was one of the original hosts of You Name It, I'll Spin It, the call-in show. So yeah, I learned a lot. Ed has a very outsized personality, but in a great way. He also loved Pepsi Cola.
Yes.
Oh.
Even more.
And still does, I imagine.
Oh,
Even room temperature.
Yes, even at room temperature.
and just the way he used to say it, Pepsi.
I gotta have,
I gotta have a Pepsi.
Well,
Second
yeah.
half.
and Ed wouldn't wear a tie, he held a gun to his head.
Yeah.
He was an open collar man.
No, and he did have this nervous habit of adjusting the tie even though it wasn't there.
Yeah.
And all of his shirts had worn patterns right here where he was on the air and he'd be adjusting that tie. There's no tie.
No, but Ed's a pro. He
Oh,
really
yeah.
is.
Yeah, yeah.
We learned
Sure.
a lot from him, yeah.
Gotta get a Pepsi.
We had a lot of people, or well, announcers, engineers, that went on to bigger things, left this market. We had Grady Pike, and he was an engineer. He was so smart. It was amazing what all he knew. And Grady went on to work for NASA, left WPAQ and went to work there. Of course, Paul Brown was news director back in the 80s. He went to work for WFDD and then later NPR in Washington, D.C. Ed McIntyre, as Brack just mentioned, he was on television in Texas, North Carolina, and maybe somewhere else. Danny McBride, do you remember a character, Dirty Dan, in Sha Na Na? Played the guitar. I think he had a pink coat he wore. He was in the movie Grease. He did the Sunday morning shift, and he called us up back in the early 80s. And he said, Ralph, you probably don't remember me. I used to work at your station, Danny McBride. I was on Sunday mornings. And do you still have Rayton Puckett to come on the air? He named off several preachers. And so Daddy remembered him. He said, our group, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, Sha Na Na, we're going to be in Greensboro, and Dr. Hook is going to be with us. And we'd like to have you and your family as our guests. So they put us on the front row there at the Greensboro Coliseum. We got to go backstage after the show, meet Dr. Hook, and of course Bowser and all of Sha Na Na. And we went up in the hotel room of Danny's, and Daddy wanted Danny to make some promos, like you're listening to WPAQ, Mount Airy, North Carolina, a legal ID. So he tried to say Sha Na Na, he would say Sha-na-na. And Danny got the biggest kick out of that. Sha-na-na. He couldn't quite get it right.
I think we need to speak a moment, maybe more than a moment, about one of Jenny's predecessors, Clyde Johnson.
Clyde Johnson, yes.
Clyde was the man. What can you say? He hosted merry-go-round for
30 or 40
Since
years.
the early 60s.
Yeah,
40 plus years, and constant as a northern star.
yeah.
And the nicest guy you'll ever meet was Clyde Johnson. Rest his soul. To keep the merry-go-round is, and we're still the second longest running live radio show in the country, right?
It's time, yeah.
Next to the Grand Ole Opry.
Right.
And to keep that tradition going, Clyde would make his way up to the studio in snowstorms and thunderstorms. And if there was nobody else to play, Clyde would play
Yeah.
on his keyboard. remember the magic keyboard?
Or the
Bluegrass
auto harp, the electronic auto harp.
Yep.
and
Or he bring his guitar.
Yeah.
And
That's called a Q chord, by the way.
Q chord.
he
didn't know
knew
that?
every musician within 200 miles of here. Clyde was something else. He emceed the Fiddler's Convention for a long, long time. Everybody loved and respected Clyde.
Yeah. We used to, I marveled at how unflappable Clyde was. Even Brack and I used to joke about it back in the day. The Rolling Stones could finish a set, burn their guitars, blow the stage up, knock the drums over, push people out of their way, and Clyde would have the same response that he did to the band that just got finished playing. Okay, thank you, everybody. And now we'll hear from you. Couldn't flap him. You could not rustle his feathers at all. It was
Couldn't
really good.
shake. And I've heard, I don't know how true this is, but if you listen back to some old merry-go-rounds, you pick up on it. If there's a band playing and Clyde wasn't crazy about them, they'd finish the song, he'd say, he'd say, that's a good tune, something like that, or he'd say, or he'd just say, thank you.
Yeah.
If he liked the band, he'd say, well, that's real fine, fellas.
Yeah, that's right.
That's mighty fun.
And, but yeah, Clyde never missed, did he ever miss a merry-go-round, ever?
I don't know.
If you did, Johnny Vipperman would fill in for him.
Johnny was great, too. Yeah, he was great.
Now, Johnny was one of the very first people to be broadcast on WPAQ, right? That's the
He was one of the early ones. Of course, Glenn McPeak's band, Albert Williams, Ben Flippin, Glenn McPeak, and I can't remember the others. But they did the test sessions for my dad when he was trying out all the equipment, the transmitter, and they had to do the test sessions after midnight, between midnight and sunrise. So they did many, many, many sessions for my dad before they actually signed on the air officially. Then you had Uncle Henry back in those days. You might remember him. He was a very unique announcer. And he'd say dum deedle-I, deedle-I, deedle-I do, say things like that. And he was very, very funny. Then Uncle Joe Johnson and Pretty Blue-Eyed Odessa, they were two of the famous announcers and musicians back then. And Mac Wiseman at one time was employed at WPAQ. So we've had quite a few. Johnny Joyce,
Jim Reed, not Jim Reed. Am I right?
Jim Eames.
Jim Eames. I'm
Jim
sorry,
Eames, Jim Eames has performed many, many times. Anybody that is somebody on their way to the top would stop in and perform live on the station.
That still does happen, by the way.
Still happens.
Who was it? I met Robin and Linda Williams one time. They just showed up at the station. I mean, they were famous. They'd been on NPR. They're on Prairie Home Companion all the time. And he said, we're just doing a tour of North Carolina, and somebody told us about this station and couldn't tell us how to get there, but said, drive till you see the tower. I mean, can you imagine touring like that? There it is over there. Let's just try to hit it. This is in the days before internet when we, couldn't use GPS or anything. Drive till you see the tower. And just to do a barnstorming tour like that. There are many artists that did and still do things like that. And they'd show up and you just stop whatever you were doing and treat them like royalty, really.
One of the ones that I remember a lot, of course, I'm a lot younger than y'all. Let me just make sure that everybody knows that.
Got a lot more hair.
It's evident. And she has the best hair of the face.
Some of
Right.
the ones that I remember, I used to love to listen to Ralph do his show, and people would write in letters, and you kind of followed these people that would send in requests, or they wanted to talk about something, or he would talk about different people that you might not have ever heard of, but that were important to him. Like June Draper is one that's coming up to me, so I kind of just got interested in that kind of stuff. But some of the more obscure people that had just funny things that they did, like one thing that stands out to me is Gary Quessenberry had this song that where he got it, I don't know. And it was just this man singing. I don't even remember who did the song.
Lasted 8 minutes.
It lasted 8 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
And he would play it. People would request it every day. Somebody would request that song. And I never will forget that when he died. That's one thing I remember on a side note is so many people passing away when I was on the air. Somebody calling me telling me James King had died. Ralph Stanley died while I was on there. A lot of significant things happened when you're just sitting up there by yourself, and it just really sticks in your mind. But back to the 8-minute song, California Joe, I can't remember what it was called, but anyways, somebody would request it, and then they'd request it again. Like, I remember it being played more than one time at a show, this 8-minute song that you would just never do that. So
By the way, radio people call an 8-minute song a bathroom break.
Yeah, if you, yeah. Mhm.
I'm gonna need to put on this 6-minute song so I can, and I'll be back, but yes. Go
But
on.
I remember when Gary Q passed away, and I asked Bob King, who was there, and I was taking over, I guess, and I said, well, I want to see if I can find that song, because I want to play it in the 5 o'clock hour after we read Gary Q's obituary. And he said, oh no, Kelly hid that. You'll never find it. I'm going to have to go find it for you. He said, we put that somewhere where nobody can find it.
There's several songs that have had that treatment up there. Should I tell him? Should I tell him about the Mount Airy song?
Oh, the autumn leaves?
Okay, there was a lady, and she's dead now, rest her soul. She wrote a song about Mount Airy for the Autumn Leaves Festival, and they sold it here for quite a while. It's Mount Airy, the greatest town you find. Well, they started requesting it, and what it was is the lady that wrote it was the one that was requesting it. You run into that a lot. And so we got so tired of hearing the song that one day, I admit, I took it off after it had finished playing. It was a 45, and I opened the back door of the station and I flung it just as hard as I could at the tower. The next day, there was a stack of 3 of them there. Because we don't have it, we can't play it anymore. Well, I'll get you another one up there. I was young. I threw all 3 of those out the back door too. They kept coming. So someday, somebody is going to go back there and clean all that kudzu off, and they're going to find hundreds of records that were literally flung out the back door. We do play the song from time to time. We didn't
As
get
you
rid
can
of
tell,
them
it
all.
takes a lot to get fired.
Yeah, well,
Daddy always wanted that song played every year. He said,
Every
"Dad,
year."
It's time to play that song.
And there have been other songs, I won't go into details, but there have been other songs that we ourselves got tired of hearing, and they just kind of got put behind something, and maybe they'll discover them someday too. You try to give everybody an equal shake. There are other people out there writing songs, and you don't want just one of them to be the, that reminds me, tell them the Andy Griffith story. Now, we got to talk about that one.
Oh, okay.
Andy Griffith grows up in Mount Airy, and of course listens to WPAQ there. He was along, and one day comes up there, right?
Well, he brought my dad a copy of the comical recitation that he did.
What it was football.
Yeah. And everybody's heard that, I'm sure. At one time, it was on an obscure label. Didn't have much circulation. And he gave a copy to my dad, and he said, Ralph, you play this if you want to. You don't have to. You play it, and people like it, you keep playing it. Or if they don't, just throw it in the trash can. And turned out it was what it was football, and we started getting all kinds of requests for it. Not long after that, Capitol got a hold of it, and it got on a major label, tremendous circulation, and it put Andy Griffith sort of on the map. So we had a small part in that, I think.
It became as I understand it, the first gold comedy single, is what I've found out.
Sounds right.
And without that thing hitting, we might not even be sitting here today. I mean, that I won't say that Andy Griffith built this town, but a considerable chunk of our livelihood around here.
Andy would come in and record public service announcements on a fairly regular basis. Daddy told me that he'd come in and do them for the Red Cross and different organizations. We've got a picture of Andy sitting there with Johnny Joyce interviewing him. You can see the reel-to-reel tape machine in the background. That's a really neat picture that I've got.
I remember-
My cherished possession.
I remember, talk about those machines. When I started up there, this was early 80s, you had solid state equipment. You turned something on and it came on and it was ready to work. Nothing at WPAQ operated like that. It was tube amplifiers and tube turntables and 2 reel-to-reel machines. So when you turned something on, it needed 45 seconds to a minute and a half before it was ready to work. Like it had to wake up.
Yeah.
Transmitters did it
Warm it
too.
up.
Yes, and one of Ralph's things was, as an engineer, well, if it's working, I'm not going to try to improve it. So he had figured out that when something went awry, those old tube amplifiers in that equipment, if you give them a good pop right on the side, that usually take care of it. Not only that, he had put little labels to tell you where to strike.
Yeah.
There were little labels about the size of 2 of your finger joints there that would say strike here. On most of the equipment. When I got it, you could play it like it was a drum set. If the turntable stopped working, you'd hit it and it'd start working again.
Yeah.
It did that all the time. Those little labels are still on some of that equipment up there.
He labeled a lot of
Oh, a
things
lot.
up there. He put used, still in pretty good shape, on some of the tubes.
Yep. Because you didn't want a child of depression and before, you didn't want to throw stuff away. You might need it again someday.
Still usable.
Yeah.
Just say that.
We have wandered far afield from your list of questions. We'd like to,
I'm here to moderate as needed if the stories are going, if the conversations are rolling. I will let them roll. I do want to continue on with Andy though, so we've talked about some of our more famous hosts on the show and personalities there, but what about some of the performers? Who are some of the favorite performers that we've had? Anyone famous come to mind? Anyone who's just a good story?
Well, we've had just about everybody that was in the business in bluegrass that would play on the Grand Ole Opry. They've come through Mount Airy, playing at schoolhouses. Anywhere they had a show, they could have a show. Like Flat and Scruggs, Charlie Monroe, Mac Wiseman, I mentioned him. He actually came to work at WPAQ for a spell. But Roy Acuff, my dad told the story about Roy was a great yo-yo performer. He'd do yo-yo tricks up around the water fountain up there at WPAQ, entertain people. Grandpa Jones has been there, June Carter. It just goes on and on.
And especially the newer ones, as you get more up into 80s,
Doc
90s.
Watson.
Doc Watson, hundreds of times, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, I got a Doc Watson story. I was, maybe 18 years old, and I was going to college, Appalachian State, and I come home on the weekends and work at this radio station. And, they were starting Merlefest. And so B. Towns, who started the original Merlefest and helped them get it together, shows up one day with Doc Watson. Well, I knew who Doc Watson was. I was thrilled to meet him, right? And we go into Studio A, and I'm making them comfortable, and Sherry Boyd's interviewing them on the air, And after the interview is over, I just sit right there and watch Doc Watson be interviewed on the air, just 10 feet away from me, and played. He brought his guitar and he played. And so what I did was I said, can we get a picture after this is over with? I want to put him out in front of the station like he's playing, put the big microphone in front of him, get him a stool. And B says, yeah, I guess that'd be all right. Doc, that'd be okay? And Doc says, I believe that'd be just wonderful. So B and Sherry go off to sign, I guess, advertising contracts for whatever they were doing for Merlefest. And I'm alone in Studio A with Doc Watson. Well, what am I going to say to him, And he says, Mark, I'm getting ready to go. And I said, okay. And he said, now remember, I'm 18 years old. I don't know what's going on. And he says, you're going to have to lead me out of here. Because blind. And I said, okay, how do I do that? Because now I'm going to have to lead a national treasure out of the studio. I'm terrified. Hey, come over here, just stand. Let me put my hand on your shoulder. Now you just walk like normal. Okay. So we start walking slowly across the studio. And I say, Doc, we're coming to the door. And he goes, and we get through the door, the first door on the studio. Studio A has what we call an airlock. It's got 2 sets of doors because they don't want sound from the hallway getting in. And so we get through the first door, and I say, Doc, we're coming to the second door. And he says, Mark, if you don't mind, you don't have to narrate the whole trip to me. I'm going to figure it out. I was terrified, but I got him. I got him up to the sofa in the front, and there my job was over with. But that picture is one of my most treasured possessions. Doc Watson sitting in front of WPAQ playing, looking like he's playing into that big microphone. And we did that with several other groups. Johnson Mountain Boys, one of my favorite bluegrass groups. There was a lot of them. There's what, 5, 6 people in the band. And at the time, we had a commercial that we did for Roscoe Dow Brothers Produce back down here behind us on Market Street.
Two-way market.
Two-way Market Street. And see, the thing was, Roscoe would give you a list. We call them grocery list ads. And you weren't expected to do all this in 30 seconds, but you had to read all 2.5 pages of whatever specials he gave you that day. It changed like every other day. You were expected to read that live. And so he had a thing called the savings train, where they would blow the whistle and you're riding the savings train down Brothers Produce. Well, Johnson Mountain Boys came in and they said, is there anything funny we could get into? And I said, yes. And so I let them do the ad for Roscoe Dow, and we all rode the savings train together. And they still talk about that. We took them out and made a picture of them in front of them, but they still talk about getting to ride the savings train. I still have that recording somewhere. Take a famous bluegrass band and just put them to work. You know, they did it for free. They thought it was hilarious.
Well, I think that one of the things when you were talking about national acts, I have often wondered if it hadn't have been for the radio station, would groups, some of the more lesser known groups, especially in the old time, have been so well known as they are now. One that comes to mind before we start on the old time, Rafe Brady, who was, he started in the medicine show, and he was a wonderful fiddler, but you know, his music, if you ask people who's really into bluegrass and old time, well, people know who Rafe Brady is, but I doubt they would have ever known if it hadn't have been for WPAQ. And then in old time, I mean, I've heard Larry Sigmund told me, he said, we would never have went nowhere if it hadn't have been for Ralph Epperson. He just got it in his head that he liked us. And if you talk about now, the unique sound of the mountains, I mean, I can remember at the Autumn Leaves Festival, it would be people as far as you could see. Everybody knew that that was who was going to play last. And who would have thought that an upright bass and a banjo would end up being
Sound like
such
a whole band.
Yeah, would sound like that. But I think that he really promoted some people that I'm sure would not have been, we wouldn't even know who they are now.
Well, Tommy Jarrett.
Oh, exactly.
Tommy
Yeah.
Jarrett.
I mean, musicians came from around the world to study with Tommy Jarrett. And his music was heard on WPAQ a bit, and he played live there many times.
Bent Flippin?
Yeah, I was on the air the morning Tommy passed away.
Oh.
And we knew Tommy was well known, and he'd been awarded and honored many times. And we started getting phone calls from the Washington Post, the New York Times, the BBC called. I thought they were joking. I picked up the phone and there was an English accent on the other end. But they had been picked up on the wire service, and they knew to call WPAQ because that's where Tommy's music had been played for so many years. In that quiet little house of his over on Franklin Road. And again, I'm pretty sure Tommy didn't think much of being famous, but he knew that, and he had Ralph, I think, to thank for putting his music out there on a much bigger stage than he would probably have gotten otherwise.
Daddy used to go out with a pole and a mic on the end of it,
Cane pole.
and a very heavy Sony stereo cassette recorder strapped over his shoulder. Sometimes I would join him and I would carry that heavy thing, and he would drop the mic in a group of musicians in a circle. And that's where he got Larry Sigmund and Barbara Poole the first time they started playing music in Galax at the Fiddlers Convention back in the 80s one year. And so he was one of the first to capture that music and put it on the radio. So they did, and Larry remembers things like that.
Well,
Actually, didn't he say that Ralph coined the phrase unique sounds of the mountain? Did he not say that?
I don't know.
I think that's right.
We have hundreds of hours of field recordings from the Mount Airy Fiddlers Convention and the Galax Fiddlers Convention because of that very apparatus Kelly was talking about. Just making your way through and some incredibly good music that would have been lost otherwise.
Oh, you go out to Galax and you take the recorder, and as the years went on, the pole got longer and longer, because the bands stand around in a big circle when they're jamming in the campground. They don't sit in a line like they do on a stage. This music's meant to be heard, you know, played in a circle pretty much, and you have to drop that mic and boom down in the middle of the circle. We use a stereophonic mic, so it's getting all these tracks. But as soon as people saw that you were with PAQ, WPAQ, they would play you their best songs. We had a rule where we wouldn't get more than 3 songs from every group because we'd be out there all night. The music was so good. And so they knew that. We'd say, give us your best 3. And they'd play like their hearts were on fire. And you get the best music. You never want to go home.
Some of the best in the whole world.
Yes, indeed. No telling how much good stuff we got. One year we were up there, Jimmy Martin was up there holding court. That's literally what he was doing. And it was his birthday. And this crowd of 200 people sang happy birthday to Jimmy Martin in the parking lot at the Gay Like Fiddlers Convention. We got that on recording.
Yeah.
I love doing stuff like that.
On that note, what would you guys say is like so important about preserving the type of music that gets played throughout WPAQ and it's part of its history?
Well, just to preserve it for future generations. What's encouraging to me is there are a lot of young people taking this kind of music up and learning to play. And that to me is gratifying, to see this is obviously going to go another generation.
I think.
And by preserving it on recordings, and being able to play them over and over and over again, that to me is another way to encourage someone to learn how to play this kind of music.
They did not write much of this music down. The people that originated the music were excellent musicians, but none of them could write. I don't think any of them could write music anyway. And so the best way to learn this music is to sit there in a room with somebody playing the song, and they go, no, go down to the D there and slide it with your finger when you do it. That's literally toe to toe is how you learn this music. And that radio station replaced you having to go all the way to Tommy Gerald's house if you could just call up and have the song played for you. We do the same thing now with YouTube, but this was way back before then. Those songs wouldn't exist, I don't think. I mean, they might be in different forms by now, wouldn't you think?
Yeah. Well, see, because of my dad's determination to preserve this music, he spent countless hours with a Presto disc cutter, which is in the museum.
Which is upstairs in the museum.
Yeah, and no one else had this equipment. So he wanted it to always be around and to last, so more people could enjoy it. So having the Friendly Four Quartet, the Mountain Park Quartet, the Silvertone Harmonizers, Lee and Juanita Moore, the Skyline Serenaders. There's so many that this music would never be heard today if it wasn't for his preservation mission, I think.
Yeah. And he didn't just throw it down on any old thing he had. He spent the money to do it right. The big RCA microphone that you've seen in some of the photos and everything, the one that we set in front of Doc Watson up there, that thing still works. And Ralph bought it new for what then would have been the price of what? A reasonable house, wasn't it? Back in the time when he bought that, it would have bought you about a 3-4 room house.
Probably so.
Yeah, and it still works. I used it when I got married up there a couple of years ago. The thing still works just fine. And the time and effort they spent, even though he and his father built the station, the lengths they went to at the time to build it. The studio up there is triple glazed insulated. It has not one window, not 2 windows, but 3 different windows to keep the sound from going where you don't want it to go. That's Star Trek kind of stuff for 1948. It really is. Modern recording studios only use 2 layers of glass. This one has 3. It has a floating floor, which is highly unusual for the time period too. It also, engineering term, is a Faraday cage. Ralph had metal put in the walls of the station to deflect any stray radio signals that might be coming in to keep them away from the recording equipment. When he put in fluorescent lights in Studio A, you can back me up on this, He ran a wire from each individual light tube all the way across the station to a transformer and then ran it back. Each one of those fixtures up there has miles of wiring just so he could get all the electromagnetic interference away from where he was doing the main work. He put a lot of thought into that place.
Very particular.
Very.
Yeah. Perfectionist.
Yes, and it shows. And it's, you can hear it in the recordings, that's for sure.
He would take an old record of that he had made, and he tried to run it through filters. He had some processing equipment in his living room to try to make it better, a better sound, because it was, some of it was, the records were pretty scratchy and damaged a little bit, but he could revive them. He had the equipment to do it. He'd make me put headphones on and listen to 2 or 3 samples. Now, which one of these do you think sounds better? Which one do you like? This one? Do you think this one's better than that one? He'd get my opinion on it, and I'd spend hours with him doing that. And you couldn't hear anybody trying to talk, like my mother would be yelling for him for something, and she couldn't be heard. You couldn't hear thunder with those headphones on that he had. Those were huge headphones. They blocked out everything. Go ahead.
No.
Now, I was just going to say, Nathan Walls is here. His dad used to be an announcer, Mike Walls.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
yeah, back in the 70s.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
I'll tell you more about that in a little bit.
Okay, I
Yep.
didn't know that.
I think preserving the music is as important as any other exhibit you have here. And well, in any, not just here, but in any part of the country. The music of a region is its history. Listen, and granted, as probably the least educated in this music as anybody on this table, but listen to it. Listen to the themes that you hear in the music. This is the music of hardworking people, hard scrabble lives, people that just barely getting by. So just trying to make another growing season, to make another year, to keep the kids going. And you hear it in that music. And it dates back so far, at the end of a very long work day. You didn't turn on the television because you didn't have one. You didn't turn on the radio because you probably didn't have one, but you picked up your fiddle, picked up your guitar. You brightened your mood, and I know people that did that for years. A dear old friend of mine's father, Mr. Paul Lowe, rest his soul, worked at the sawmill, one of the hardest working men I've ever known, and at the end of his day, he would come and sit down in his chair and pick up his banjo. He had TV, but he didn't want it. But the themes are all there. It's trying to keep the farm going, trying to keep life going, and it's written there, and some of it's kind of hard to listen to. Some of it's very triumphant. Some of it's just plain fun, and some of them are dance tunes. This is how we make ourselves happy at the end of these long days. You know, this is how we brighten our spirits, and that was brought over from Ireland, Scotland, England, and other points. So it is as much a part of the history of this region as photographs that we preserve, or farm implements, or any other exhibit in this wonderful museum. And that's why it needs to be preserved, so that these new musicians Kelly was talking about can hear them and understand that it's the fabric of who they are. It's their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents' lives, written, or maybe not written down, but at least in a musical form. That's my 2 cents on that.
It's a very good comment. So we've talked a lot about the history of the music and its influence on the station and the community itself, but what would you guys say, how Ralph's deep spirituality, how it kind of developed, how the station came to be, and the personality of the station?
I'm sorry.
Spirituality.
The spirituality component of the station, how Ralph's spirituality kind of played a part in the station becoming what it is today.
He stuck to his ecumenical guns on a lot of things, especially the no alcohol clause. And I saw that work. I was much younger, and our sales director at the time had an offer on the table from a beer company, from a national beer concern, regional advertising, big money. Quite a decent deal, lined up, ready to go. Absolutely not. Walked right away from it. It frustrated Carolyn, remember? It
Yeah.
frustrated her no end. But these are the rules he'd set up for himself and his business. And at the end of the day, he was signing the checks. This is the way we will do this. That's impressive. There's not a lot of people I know that wouldn't go, okay, just this once. No, not at all. He kept the promise. That guy did everything else that was done. I'm not talking about just the alcohol thing, but when he gave someone their word, he pretty much was doing that. And that was also true with the way he prayed and the way he went to church and the way he had his faith. I can remember a certain time when there was a preacher that had a program up there and took it upon themselves to every week talk about why this division of religion was wrong, and this division of religion was wrong. This division of religion was wrong. If you're not one of us, then you're not obviously going to go the right way. And I finally called Ralph's attention to it. I said, do you know what this guy's saying? And Ralph went and had a word with him and said, we're not going to broadcast that. And the message that this guy was bringing changed after that. I mean, you easily could have said, well, if people don't like it, they'll tune out. Yeah, they would. Some of them wouldn't be back. He knew that. He didn't want his station to be broadcasted that kind of idea, I guess. Am I wrong? I don't think so.
You're right on.
I saw him stick to his guns many a time. And I would walk. I was young. I was in high school, and I'd walk away from that. I can't believe he turned down that much money just like that. That would have bought us new equipment. That would have. We're getting along fine with what we got. You don't run into people who run businesses quite like that now. I don't think many people do.
I asked him one time, I said, why are you so against this? I mean, it's everywhere.
It's in the culture now.
Yeah, and we're not gonna, it's not gonna matter that much if we did some of this. And this is back when I was young and in high school. And he'd say, well, he said, this would make me feel bad if I thought or felt like that I influenced someone to drink an alcoholic beverage and then got behind the wheel of a car. I never will forget him telling me that.
I had a chance to interview, you mentioned Johnny Berkman earlier, and I had a chance to interview Johnny a good number of years ago. And we were talking about Ralph, and he said, Ralph, there were things that were very important to Ralph: his faith, his family, and WPAQ. And he said, and depending on the mood you catch Earlene in, the last two are interchangeable. but Ralph's faith was very important to him. He lived it every day, and he also knew it was important to the listeners. That's why the religious programming is still part of the programming. It's changed over the years. There are some who have been on for many, many years. But he knew that was part of his mission. Preserving the music was, I think, drove him. And Kelly, you can feel free to correct me here, but that's what drove him in many regards. But he also knew that setting aside time for this was important to everybody out there who was listening. And I think there are folks who might not have stayed with WPAQ had there not been the religious programming, and especially with some of the local ministers that they know, or maybe were at their churches. And then he opened up those opportunities for all of them. And as Mark said, he stuck to it when everybody else was going in a different direction. He stayed the course, and that's hard to do in the business world. I'm sure you've all know that.
Well, the preaching is also a form of preservation of the culture as well.
Yeah.
We talk about him preserving the music. He also preserved the jokes of the area. He also preserved the storytelling of the area, the preaching of the area. We started calling it Voice of the Blue Ridge. I don't remember when. It literally is. It is the combination of all of our voices going out every day. And that influences even what I do here at the museum. When we put something on an exhibit, like we're already doing it back there in that room with the cabin. Stop by the cabin on your way out. You push a button and you hear somebody talk in dialect about some facet of life here. And we're going out of our way to capture the dialect. I want people that visit to hear how we actually would say that. We're not putting on airs. I want you to hear how people sound when they're from Surry County. And you get to hear that through WPAQ. See, it influences even in different weird ways that he never would have thought about. It's important to preserve our voices, literally.
Speaking of voices, y'all got trained by Ralph, who told you to say, I can't even say W. I say it wrong, and Tim Fry will correct me. Now,
The
Ralph
first
would have
thing
never let
I
you let
learned.
us, you would have never got by with talking like that if Ralph was here.
The very first lesson I learned at that station was it is W, not W, W.
Like
And
a
he made me
double?
practice saying it, W, W. And you can always tell radio people, because if they say that letter, we all say it the same way, pretty much, you know. W. Anytime you hear it, you know somebody's been working in broadcasting. You get away with it just because you're young and cute, but the rest of us,
He was real particular about how you said Mount Airy.
oh yeah.
It's not Mount Terry. Some announcers would say it that way.
I still do it that way.
And,
I calmed down a few times.
Mount Airy, no, it's Mount Airy.
Mount
Mount Airy. But he was real particular.
And if you ever listen to the Blue Ridge Spotlight when Ralph hosted it, and that show, it is still outstanding. It's still the centerpiece of much of the station. But in the years that Ralph hosted it, it was like this. Every Saturday afternoon was this nice warm blanket you wrap around yourself,
Mhm.
and you listen to this wonderful man tell stories. Ralph didn't sound like a radio man.
Mm-mm.
He didn't sound like me, or a lot of the other voices here on the air. But that conversational style of his just drew you in. You wanted to listen. You couldn't help but listen. And he didn't. He didn't sound like Casey Kasem. No,
Mm-mm.
he was there to tell his story his way, and that set him apart and also made him unique at the same time.
First time I heard Garrison Keillor on the air, I didn't get what the fuss was about because I've been hearing Ralph do that style of announcing since I knew him. But there's Garrison Keillor on Prairie Home Companion coming across like that. I don't think he's copying Ralph, but he could have influenced him. He was doing that well before that, and it's just this, like you say, this warm, comfortable feeling. Because if I get on the air, it's not going to sound like that. You're going to know I'm an announcer. Which, by the way, I started doing production there, and I discovered how to make the tape echo. Echo, go. I started using it in the commercials. Ralph did not like that one bit, because that distances you from the listener. That puts you at the end of a hall, where it's echoing down the hall. He did not want that. He wanted like you were talking to them on a phone. He wanted like they were sitting across from you drinking coffee. And I've always tried to remember that.
I went to a doctor's appointment one time in Winston-Salem at Baptist Hospital to see an ear, nose, and throat specialist. And he said, Epperson. There was an Epperson man that was on a radio station not too far from here. Said he had a program on the weekends. I think it was on Saturday. He said, I didn't really care a whole lot for what he was playing, the music, but I just enjoyed listening to him talk. He had a calming effect on me. I never will forget that. I said, well, that was my dad. That made me proud when he said that.
Now, he sounded calm on the air,
Yeah.
and his part of it was calm, but if you were running the board for the Blue Ridge Spotlight, Ralph had this habit of when you went to a commercial, he'd stand up and he'd go, all right, and he'd pass the record to you through the door into the other little room. He'd pass the record into the control room. He'd go, okay, play track number 4 on this one. Get that one all queued up. You'd get it queued up, those big steel turntables. By the way, they took a turn and a half to come up to speed when you turned them on. So if you're putting a record on and you want it to hit just right, you have to back cue it a turn and a half. A turn and a half. Lou Bodie earned his nickname Smooth Lou because he never back cued. He could drop the needle on the record and it would start like that every time. Never seen anybody else do it. So you turn this thing back and you get it all set up, and it's ready to play. And you come back from commercial and Ralph says something like, well, next up, we're going to hear from the Delmore Brothers. We're going to hear them sing Sunny Side of Life, and that's not the number that he just gave you to cue up.
Yeah, that happened a lot.
That's, actually, it's on the other side of the record, Ralph, and so you'd have to turn on the mic and either say something like, Ralph, why don't you give him the weather while you, or if you couldn't cover, you'd just say, hang on a minute. And it sounded like just two guys sitting in a room going through a record collection trying to decide what to play. But he had planned those records a week in advance, right? He worked on the show all the
He had a
time.
legal pad.
Yeah.
And he would write down all the songs he wanted to play that day. And he'd have a little suitcase, like a little, just a brown suitcase. And it had a lot of cassette tapes that were queued up right where he wanted it to be. And it would be a transfer. He had transferred from old records that he had made, put them on cassette. And then he had some records he had pulled out he wanted to play. But he had them all on a legal pad. And I still have those, every one of them. And one thing I liked about my dad is he thought this music, no matter how people felt about it, maybe some made fun of it, but he felt like it was special. And he didn't like when they started calling it hillbilly.
Oh, yeah.
That was not a good word to him, hillbilly. So don't use that word. He had extensive vocabulary. The man read the dictionary a lot. He told me he did. He said that'll help you if you just take a dictionary and read when you've got time. And he had big words. He used these really, had a great vocabulary and gave a lot of class
Yes.
to what he was playing.
Yes.
You know, because a lot of this was from simple people, but he had a way of talking that was just over everybody's head. But he had a conversation when he talked to you.
He didn't sound imperious when he used the big words. It just sounded like the most natural thing to come out of his mouth
Yeah.
when he talked about your elocutionary input and things like that. What? What does that mean? But it didn't sound like he was lording it over you. It just was the way he spoke normally.
Yeah. Lucy used to laugh at him. Instead of saying Aunt Dinah, he'd say Aunt Dinah. Aunt Dinah's quilting party. And Lucy, my aunt, his sister, would laugh and laugh at that. So there goes Ralph again saying aunt.
People don't say that way around here. It's always aunt.
Aunt. We should say, you talked about Lucy a little bit too. Lucy was the other half of the radio station. She did all the paperwork, she did all the billing, right? She did all the financial part of it.
On a Royal typewriter.
On a Royal typewriter. And Lucy was also famous for not being very tuned into what was going on in the control room. So if you were on the air, you might be reading obituaries. Lucy would still burst through the door and just start talking like, you know, I'm reading the obituary. Now, don't forget to turn the light off when you come to,
Yeah.
I'm on the air.
Mark, would you read this in a little bit? Ralph wants this read.
Yeah, literally. And on several occasions, vacuuming the floor. I'm on the air just from here to that TV away. And you'd have to either go to commercial or just try to shout your way through it. It was, or transferring phone calls back there to you when you were on the air. Right in the middle of the obituary, suddenly the phone is ringing right beside of you. And at one point, you know, the studio, the whole radio station was wired so that you could send your voice all over that thing. And so I learned how to do it, and I turned the monitors up front to where only I could hear them. It didn't go out over the air, and I said, I am on the air right now, have them call back. That
You
phone
can flip a
rang
switch.
and rang and rang and rang. Yeah, she was, I don't know whether she did it intentionally just to get my goat or not. I never have figured that out. Good job on her.
Lucy was special. She kept us all in line in
She
her
did.
way.
She did.
And she really helped my dad a whole lot. He depended on her for a lot of things. And that really saddened him when she passed away. She was the first to pass away in that family. Now there's only Stu and Mary Lee
Yeah.
left.
Need to mention Buzz.
And Buzz, Buzz spoke. He got that nickname Buzz because he loved to race. He loved racing, and he was pretty fast himself in his car.
I would never know how to use an Ampex reel-to-reel recorder without Buzz. He gave me my tutorial on how to do that.
Buzz was real particular with how you handled the equipment up there.
Yeah, now that I think about it, it was kind of a silly nickname for an engineer type person, Buzz. But yes, he taught me an awful lot about how to turn the things on and how to turn them off at the end of the night.
And he checked the station.
Oh, yeah.
He would come in and faithfully every night, no matter what night, weekend, weekday night. He would come in and take him an hour sometimes to go through and check everything to make sure it was cut off. He'd clean the heads to the cart machines. You've seen 8-tracks. Well, we used to have these little carts that looked similar to an 8-track. He would clean the heads on the machines that would get really dirty. He'd take alcohol, rubbing alcohol, and a Q-tip, and just swipe it over the heads and the rollers in those machines.
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. What was it that used to take, setting the clocks.
Oh, yeah.
Radio station had clocks all throughout it because time is very important, and these great big clocks too. Those big, they're 12 inches or more across, so you could read them from across the room. And one of the other first things I learned was how to read the time on the radio. It is 15 minutes after 2. You don't say 2:15. You have to say it is 15 minutes until the hour of 6 or something like that. And so there's these big clocks. Ralph had actually built the station so that the clocks in every room were on the same circuit. So you could stand at the back of the station and flip the circuit breaker and all the clocks would stop. And the reason he did this is because once a week, was it, or once a month, I can't remember, he would tune in the shortwave to Wheeling, West Virginia, WWV, and they would count it down. At the tone, the time will be 2 minutes, 15 seconds, and that kind of thing. And so what you'd have to do is stand back there, and he would go, now, when I point my finger at you, hit the breaker. Well, you're never going to get it right, and it would take, you'd have to wait for the time to come back around to the next minute, and then we'd have to go through and reset all the clocks to the next minute, so we were ready to hit them when the time came. Changing time up there took forever. You'd stay there for an hour changing the time on the clocks in the station, and they better be right. Every one of them better be right. So many years later, when they were cleaning out the basement of the radio station, they had an old clock, a Dr. Pepper clock. Dr. Pepper, pepper up at 10, 2, and 4. And it had hung in the studio for years, and the motor was burned out of it. And I took it off the trash pile and took it home and took it to King and had a fella down there remotor it, and it now hangs in my house, and it's one of my prized possessions. I did not steal it.
No.
I took it off the trash pile.
Lucy probably said, just take it on.
She didn't even know it.
He
She'd
won't
already
miss it.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked a lot about the history of the station and local music here today, but I do want to ask each of you, what do you see is the future of the station and local music?
Good question. You better answer that one.
Well, we've gone FM. That was a big move.
And internet.
And the internet. We did that a year after he passed away. We did it on his birthday, 2007. He would have been 86 that day. We started streaming to the world. There is the opportunity, if we were to ever get really, if we really wanted to push it, we could probably get more power on the AM band, but we would have to change our signal pattern. We'd have to be a directional station, have to probably send the signal to the south, to the east, maybe, or west.
Not the north.
Because we're on a clear channel, a Canadian frequency. There's a station in Toronto, Canada, that we have to protect. So that's why we're only a sunrise and sunset station. We're not on the AM overnight. Only the FM and streaming are on full time.
The flagship of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation is on AM 740.
Yeah.
And if you were late lowering power here, they would know about it. One night I was late, I missed it by about 10 minutes, and the phone rang. And I picked it up. I'm in high school. I picked it up, and this voice says, "Hey, you're still coming in a little hot, eh?" And I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "Is this WPAQ?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "This is so-and-so with KCBC or whatever it is. We need you to step your power down." I was getting ready to cause an international incident with Canada. And I thought, when they told me all this, I thought, there's no way they can hear us. They can hear you just fine in Toronto. Think about that.
Back then, didn't have as much interference.
No.
Our signal really got out.
No, and in the winter, when you left the station and you went home and your radio station was still set to 740, you could hear their traffic reports and everything like we'd never turned off our transmitter. Yeah, I think you still can do that.
Yeah, we would have to add some more towers and do a real extensive, expensive engineering study. But maybe go to 50,000 watts. That would be maybe something for the future.
Wow.
But as far as programming change, I don't think we're open to that.
Do we have any last remarks from our panel?
I just think that it's, the radio station has been so important to many of the community here, and I know elsewhere as well, but just local community. I know that we've met a lot. It's so funny that we're sitting here in a room with all these dodos, because I like to think about sometimes that we are kind of a dinosaur, because we're somewhat of a last holdout in radio. It's just not so often that you see a station that has been going for this long. But I know that we're not going to go extinct, because I feel like that the standard was set and Kelly's going to keep it going. And hopefully another Epperson after you're gone will want to do the same. But I just know it's meant so much to so many people. I know Floyd and Faye, they listen all the time, and we have a lot of listeners that's really been faithful over the years. It means a lot to a lot of people. I'm glad to take part in it.
Doug too, he's
Oh,
been
yeah.
faithful.
He's one that wants that AM to increase because he can't get it
Yeah.
early of a morning.
I think it's important that the community embrace WPAQ. I mean, they do in many ways. But I don't think you can overstate how unique and important that radio station is. I mean, Mr. Stewart said it himself, his success started with this success. And Jenny's right, it's holding its own still. But you gotta find a new generation. And I think that's a bit of a challenge as well, is making other people aware that aren't already fans of the station. That's important that it does continue. Broadcast radio is in peril. We live in an age when I can pick up my phone and say, Alexa, play this, and they'll play it. You don't have to switch on the dial anymore.
And local broadcast is even more of a peril.
Yeah, and you've got to find, you've got to find ways to reach out to those new generations and encourage them. And that's tough, because you've also got to respect, dance with the ones that brung you, as the saying goes, and keep that tradition alive as well. I think Kelly and his family are up to the task. I just hope the community will not necessarily wait for an anniversary to support WPAQ for the influence it's had on this community and the contribution it's made to this community for 75 years and beyond, and honor Mr. Epperson's mission.
Thank you, Brian.
I think it's really interesting that there's so many in the community that remembers 75 years ago when it started. I was talking to Betty Blackman earlier in the week, and she said, I was at when it started, at the first celebration. And then Paul remembers it. He was 13 years old, he remembers it.
Yeah.
He's got stories to tell about it. And this gentleman,
Mention one person, Ray Myers.
Yeah, the armless
Talk about Ray
musician.
Myers.
Oh yeah, it was a fellow that was a very talented musician, but he had no arms, and he could play with his toes. He was known as Ray Myers, the armless musician.
And you'd never know if you didn't know,
He'd
right?
drive a car, he'd shave, smoke a cigarette
Open bottles.
with his toes, with his feet. And they asked him one time, how do you hug your girlfriend? He said, I just hug her. Throw his leg up.
where was he from?
I'm not sure if he was local
And he
or,
would come and sing on the radio.
yeah, he was on a regular basis, he played. And we've got some vintage recordings that came out on CD back in '98 called, it was on Rounder label, the Rounder label. It was the voice of the Blue Ridge, WPAQ. He's on that. If you're lucky enough to get a copy of that somewhere. Sometimes I see him on eBay. But he's on there.
I've got it down, so we are down to our 10-minute mark before we have to wrap up today, but is it all right to officially turn the floor over for questions?
Yeah, sure.
All right. If anyone today has a question they'd like to ask anyone on the panel, you're free to step up, raise a hand, anything else you'd like. No questions out today?
We're better at this than we thought we were.
You cover everything.
Well, it's been an honor to have even a corner, a tiny little corner of this real estate. It really has. I'm glad my mom was persistent enough to get me a high school job back in the day. I've left and I've come back, and I've left and I've come back, and that's just the way radio goes. We've had people that have worked for us over the years. One in particular I can think of that has worked at every radio station up and down the southeast coast. And he worked for us for 10 minutes one time, and he worked for us for about 3 weeks one time. And people come and go in this business, and will continue to do so, I'm sure, but the station's gonna go on. They're not gonna change. I remember when they were looking for a place to put the new Jones School, the new Jones School. How long has it been there? 20-something years now or more? And Kelly said, they came to me and they asked me a question and said, we probably know the answer to this, but would you consider selling this land for the space for the new school? And I don't know.
And relocate your station.
Relocate the station. And I didn't realize it until I do sunsets. I take pictures of sunrises, up there at the station every day. And I did not realize it until I started looking at my pictures one year that the tower is almost exactly due east of the radio station. At one point or 2 points during the year, the sun will split that tower as it comes up on the solstices, right? And I didn't realize that. And that was designed that way for signal strength, I guess. I'm not really sure. I think that's kind of cool. It's almost like it's our own little Stonehenge, you know?
Oh, yeah. That's
And that kind of the way I look at it.
I never thought about that.
Kind of the way I look at it.
Anybody have any questions? Talk about Mike. You remember, does Mike ever reminisce with you about being at WPAQ?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my dad was at WPAQ for about a year in 77 to 79 time frame.
Right.
And Kelly, you were in middle school or high school.
High school.
Is what you've told me. He remembered you being there. Really enjoyed working with you. And he left to go to WFMX in Statesville right after that. He's told me before, he got more money out of it, but he always talks very fondly of your dad. And even to this day, that was one of his regrets in radio, was leaving WPAQ to go somewhere else, because he enjoyed working with Ralph Epperson.
He was one of the nicest folks.
Yeah.
Nicest guys.
Still a nice guy,
Yeah.
right, Joy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Still a good
very
man.
polite and friendly and perfect on the air. I just thought he was great.
Yeah, and WPAQ played the type of music he enjoys, that his dad enjoyed when he was alive, and I think he felt that it was just the perfect type of family to work for. He worked for other radio stations, and they were good radio stations, but they may pound you into the ground trying to get those sales. WPAQ, you got to get the sales, but it was a family atmosphere, and he always said good things about Ralph. Yep.
Thank you.
When I got there, everybody called him Ralph. I was 15 years old, and I was not going to call this 2,000-year-old man Ralph. He really wasn't that old, but I was brought up by Southern parents. You call him Mr. He's your boss, you're going to call him Mr. And he didn't want me to call him Mr. It was hard to say. He didn't want me to call him. So finally I came up with Uncle Ralph. I'll call you Uncle Ralph. And that suited just fine. It made you feel like you were part of that family. Because that's what it is. You look out for each other and you have each other's back and that sort of thing. Uncle Ralph.
Makes me think of Uncle Jack, man.
Kinda, yeah.
We didn't
Uncle
mention
Jack.
Uncle Jack
Uncle
Fowler.
Jack Fowler.
Wow.
He
Just
was
lost him
He
this
was
past
really a fixture on the Sundown Serenade. And what a great,
What a great voice.
Yeah.
great voice and knowledge of big band music. And,
Yeah.
he had a conversation with you, and he just had a ball
Yes.
when he was on the air. I remember he almost quit. He just felt like he couldn't get the records to play and had a lot of dead air, and he just felt like he was messing up. He said, "I just don't think this is my cup of tea, Kelly. And I just think I need to go away." And I said, no, you're great. Everybody makes mistakes when they first start. Just stay in there, I'll help you. We'll get through it. I don't know, Kelly. And he did.
Oh, I don't
And
know,
I'm so
Kelly.
glad, yeah.
He had the greatest voice for swing and big band music.
Yes.
He sounded like a guy from the 1940s because he was. And the first time I heard him, I thought, man, that guy is doing a really bad radio announcer mimicking of that. No, that was his voice. I mean, he just pulled you in with that voice. Fantastic. And we begged him. We were like, Jack, syndicate this. People nationwide would love to hear this. They won't believe you're real, you know. No, I'm happy here at home, Marco. That's what he'd say.
And make no mistake, Ralph's still there.
Oh, yeah.
You can feel his presence.
Yeah.
You really can.
And we left up some signs that he made.
Yep.
Still got signs.
Yep.
He was terrified of snakes, and he wanted us to cover the behind the transmitters were these big vents. You would cover them with big pieces of plywood, and in the morning you'd take the plywood out so the station could breathe. He wanted air flowing through those transmitters because those tubes get hot. And so there was a fan in the ceiling over an industrial strength fan. You could empty the entire radio station out just by opening the front door and turning on that fan. It sucked the whole thing clean in about 30 seconds. So he was terrified of snakes. If snakes got into that station, the only time I ever heard him upset, he squealed when he found a black snake down there. He made a little squealing noise. And I kept saying, I liked black snakes, and I kept saying, look, the snakes are okay. They're down there eating the mice. I'd rather have the mice and squirrels than the snakes.
He had a fellow's name and a phone number in Lucy's office in the closet. It said snake catcher. He also had a sign on the door, and he used Latin for entry, going in and coming out. Be sure when you go in and out of the transmitter room to have the door closed to prevent snake entry. That was one of the.
Yes. Has crawled into the transmitter, and the transmitter is offline, and they need you to help Ralph. What had happened is the snake had crawled across the the secondary winding of the transformer in the thing, and had liquefied itself.
Oh.
I don't mean it had just caught fire and burned. I mean it had turned to soup in the bottom of the transmitter. And so Ralph and I took turns sponging, because we didn't have shop vacs then, sponging snake soup out of the 2-week-old snake soup out of the bottom of the transmitter. And he would go out back and throw up a little bit, and then I would go out back and throw up a little bit. And that's one of my very favorite memories of that whole station, is us sponging the snake soup out of the transmitter.
It's one of your favorite?
It's one of my favorite memories.
But you know he's nuts, right? So that's why.
You got to be.
I guess you gotta be.
You
That's
gotta
your
do
favorite. What is your least favorite?
Oh, I got plenty of least favorite ones.
Thank you for including me on this panel. I feel the least qualified here, but I enjoyed it. Thank you.
It's been great having you all of you. We're all family. We really are. We're close knit.
We talk about each
I've known
other
these
too.
people for a long time.
We talk about each other. Don't y'all do it, but we
We share everything but COVID. Try not to.
Thank you all for coming.